They called me the old-fashioned relative, mocked me at my granddaughter's wedding, but one envelope changed everything. Ever seen a family destroyed by the truth they thought I'd never use? The grand ballroom of the Imperial Hotel in downtown Chicago shimmered under crystal chandeliers for my granddaughter Olivia's wedding. I smoothed the lapel of my classic navy suit, a cherished gift from my late husband, George, at 70. Still believed in looking my best, especially for family celebrations. But what was supposed to be a day of joy quickly turned into a public humiliation. As I approached the guest check-in, a bubbly young attendant handed me my name tag. Instead of Eleanor Vance, grandmother of the bride, it read in elegant script. The old-fashioned relative funding it all? My hand froze, the warmth of my cheeks instantly replaced by a burning flush of mortification. "Surely there's a mistake," I asked, forcing a strained smile. The young woman's eyes widened as she read it, a quick apology tumbling from her lips. "No, it's quite all right," I insisted, though my heart pounded with a sickening beat. I pinned the offensive tag to my lapel, the weight of it suddenly heavier than any diamond. Ever been mocked by your own family while smiling through the pain? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And hit subscribe if you know what it's like to carry grace through cruelty. Throughout the cocktail hour, I tried to blend into the background. But then I overheard a hushed conversation that made my blood run cold. "Did you see Eleanor's tag?" a snide voice whispered. "Clara said it was her idea. A hilarious joke." Another snickered. "Apparently, she's their private trust fund. Clara, my son Thomas's wife, Olivia's mother. The architect of this cruelty." Just then, Thomas spotted me. "Mom, over here," he boomed, waving me towards a group of his well-heeled colleagues. "Come meet the Davises. Dad used to invest with Mr. Davis." I approached reluctantly. Mr. Davis, a portly man with kind eyes, looked vaguely familiar. "Mom, this is Robert and Carol Davis," Thomas announced, then added with a chuckle, "Mom, our personal piggy bank." Carol Davis's smile faltered as she glanced at my name tag. "Eleanor Vance," I stated, extending my hand firmly. "George's widow." Robert Davis's face softened. "Of course. George spoke of you often. He admired your quiet strength." Their genuine warmth was a balm, but Thomas's words still echoed. Later, pulled Thomas aside, pointing to the name tag. "What is the meaning of this, Thomas?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shrugged, laughing dismissively. "Oh, Mom, don't be so sensitive. It's just a bit of fun. Everyone knows you're the one with all the cash since Dad passed." "It's humiliating," I said quietly. He rolled his eyes. "Lighten up, it's a party." Before I could respond, Clara appeared, elegant in a designer gown. "There you are, Eleanor. Has Thomas been introducing you around? We want everyone to know who's responsible for this gorgeous wedding." She winked, and they both laughed. I excused myself and retreated to the ladies' room, splashing cold water on my burning cheeks. As I dabbed my eyes, the door opened, and a distinguished gentleman entered, then politely backed out. "Mrs. Vance Eleanor." He called softly from outside. "It's Arthur Jenkins, George's attorney. Could I have a word?" I composed myself and stepped out. Arthur had handled George's estate with quiet professionalism. He gestured vaguely at my name tag. "And some of the comments," he added, his expression darkening. "It's not funny, Eleanor. George would have been furious." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's something you should know. Something George insisted I not tell you unless it became necessary." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is a codicil to George's will." He added it shortly before he passed. I opened it with trembling fingers. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was stark. Any descendant who publicly humiliates Eleanor forfeits their entire inheritance. George's fortune was far larger than I had ever realized. I looked up at Arthur, stunned. Why wouldn't he tell me this? He hoped it would never be needed, Arthur said quietly. He wanted them to treat you right because they loved you, not because they feared losing their inheritance. I glanced back at the ballroom where my family celebrated, oblivious to the millions their behavior had just cost them. "What do you want to do?" Arthur asked. I carefully folded the document. "Nothing. Not yet. I need to see just how far they'll go." As I re-entered the reception, the name tag felt heavier, but now, instead of shame, a quiet resolve settled within me. I would finally see my family for who they truly were. The morning after the wedding, sat at my kitchen table, staring at the offensive name tag. The old-fashioned relative funding it all. I traced the elegant calligraphy, remembering George's rare but formidable temper when someone disrespected those he loved. "They've changed," I whispered to the empty room. Or maybe they were always this way and we just didn't want to see it. I moved to the living room, drawn to the large family portrait from 5 years ago, our 40th anniversary. George sat in the center, robust despite the early signs of his illness. I stood beside him, my hand on his shoulder. Thomas and Clara flanked us, and Olivia and her brother Alex, then teenagers, stood in front. We looked happy. We looked like a family. When exactly had things changed? The question haunted me as I made my morning tea. Perhaps it had been gradual, a subtle erosion of respect that I hadn't noticed until it was too late. The first clear memory came 6 months after George's funeral. Thomas and Clara invited me to dinner, a rare occurrence. They were unusually attentive, asking about my well-being, reminiscing about George. Then, over dessert, they revealed the true purpose of the evening. "Mom," Thomas had said, refilling my wine glass, "Clara and I have been thinking about remodeling our kitchen. Nothing fancy, just updating the appliances, new countertops, that sort of thing." "That sounds lovely," I'd replied, oblivious. "The thing is," Clara continued smoothly, "with college tuition for the kids and everything else, we're a bit stretched right now." I remembered the pause, the expectant looks. "Are you asking me for money?" "Not asking," Thomas quickly interjected. "It's just that Dad left you quite comfortable, and we thought maybe you'd want to help out the family." I wrote them a check for $30,000 that evening. That was the beginning. Small requests grew larger. A kitchen remodel became a full home renovation. Tuition assistance turned into luxury cars for both Olivia and Alex when they turned 18. Family vacations that I was invited to join and expected to fund. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out a box of financial records. Sitting on the floor like a schoolgirl, I sorted through bank statements and canceled checks. The evidence of my financial support for Thomas and Clara's lifestyle was overwhelming. Over 3 years, I had given them nearly $250,000. The phone rang, startling me. It was Clara. "Eleanor, are you home? I've been calling your cell phone." "Yes, I'm home. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she chirped. "Thomas and I just wanted to thank you for everything yesterday. Wasn't the wedding beautiful?" "Yes, it was lovely," I said. "Olivia and Ben are so grateful for your generosity. They couldn't have had such a wonderful wedding without you." I closed my eyes, remembering the $45,000 check I'd written for the venue and catering. I was happy to help. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling," Clara continued, her voice taking on that syrupy quality. "Ben's parents were supposed to pay for the honeymoon, but his father's business has been struggling, and they've had to back out. Olivia is just devastated. I knew what was coming next. We were wondering if you might be able to help. They've got their hearts set on 2 weeks in the Swiss Alps. Thomas and I would contribute, of course, with everything we spent on the wedding. Everything they spent. I had covered almost all of it." "I'll think about it," I said, surprising. Both of us with my non-committal response. After hanging up, I returned to my financial archaeology. George had always warned me about Thomas's relationship with money. "He sees it as the solution to everything," he'd told me once, "but money without values just creates more problems." I hadn't understood then, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to. A knock at the door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw Alex, my grandson, shifting nervously on the porch. I quickly gathered the scattered papers and stashed them back in the closet. Before opening the door, "Grandma," he said, stepping forward to hug me. At 21, he was tall like his grandfather, with the same kind eyes. "Are you okay? I've been texting you." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a bit tired after yesterday. Come in." He followed me to the kitchen where I put on the kettle for fresh tea. Alex had always been different, more thoughtful, less fixated on appearances. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday," he said, sitting at the table. "It's the name tag. The way everyone was talking, it wasn't right. A lump formed in my throat. You noticed?" "Course I noticed. So did a lot of people." He looked down, embarrassed. "I should have said something." I patted his hand. "It's not your responsibility to correct your parents, but it is my responsibility to stand up for what's right." He looked at me directly. "Dad and Mom, they've changed since Grandpa died. Or maybe I just didn't see it before. All they talk about is money. Your money specifically." "What do you mean?" Alex hesitated. "Last week I overheard them discussing your house." Dad said something about how it's too big for one person and how they could help you downsize. The kettle whistled, giving me a moment to absorb this. As I poured the hot water over the tea bags, I thought about Arthur Jenkins and the codicil to George's will. I thought about the name tag, the constant requests for money, and now this. A parent planned to move me out of my home, Grandma. Alex's voice brought me back. "Are you sure you're okay?" I set the teapot on the table and sat down across from him. "I'm better than okay, Alex. I think I'm finally seeing things clearly for the first time in years." "What do you mean?" I smiled, making a decision. "Just that it's time for some changes around here." As we sipped our tea, I studied my grandson's face, wondering if he was truly different from his parents or if the seeds of entitlement were merely dormant. For the first time since George died, a cold clarity replaced my grief and loneliness. I wouldn't make any hasty decisions, but I would be watching, waiting to see who truly deserved George's legacy. 3 days after the wedding, Thomas and Clara organized a post-wedding brunch at their country club, the exclusive lakeside estates in Lake Forest, Illinois. I deliberated whether to attend, but curiosity won out. I wanted to see if the name tag incident was an anomaly or part of a pattern. As I entered the private dining room, dressed in a simple but elegant cream pantsuit that George always said made me look regal, I noticed several wedding guests, including Olivia and her new husband, Ben, Alex, and various relatives and friends. "Mom, over here," Thomas called, waving me towards the head table. Clara, resplendent in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, gave me an air kiss. "Eleanor, you look nice," she said, her tone suggesting mild surprise. "We saved you a seat right here." I settled into the chair, noting I'd been placed next to Ben's parents, whom I barely knew. Rather than near my grandchildren, the brunch proceeded pleasantly enough until Clara clinked her glass for attention. "We want to thank everyone for coming today and for helping make Olivia and Ben's wedding so special," she began. "And of course, a special thank you to Grandma Eleanor, who has been so incredibly generous." All eyes turned to me. "In fact," Clara continued, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "we have an exciting announcement. Grandma will be funding Olivia and Ben's dream honeymoon to the Swiss Alps." There was a smattering of applause. I sat frozen, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. I'd made no such commitment. "Mom," Thomas prompted when I didn't immediately acknowledge the announcement. I carefully set my cup down. "This is the first I'm hearing of it," I said, keeping my voice level. An awkward silence fell over the table. Olivia looked confused, then embarrassed. Ben stared at his plate. "Well, we discussed it yesterday," Clara said with a brittle laugh. "Remember, you said you'd think about it?" "Yes, I did say that, and I'm still thinking." Thomas leaned over, speaking in a stage whisper clearly meant to be heard. "Mom, don't make a scene. We've already told them they can book the trip. I felt something inside me snap. A thread stretched too far for too long. I don't recall agreeing to pay for a honeymoon to the Swiss Alps, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. In fact, I believe Ben's parents were originally planning to cover this expense. Ben's father shifted uncomfortably. There were some business setbacks, he muttered. I understand, I said kindly. These things happen. But I think it's inappropriate to publicly volunteer someone else's money without their agreement, don't you? The table fell silent. Clara's face flushed red. Perhaps Olivia and Ben might consider a more modest honeymoon, I suggested. One within their means. Their means, Clara hissed. What about your means? Everyone knows George left you more than comfortable. Something in her toned the entitlement. The resentment made my decision clear. My financial situation is not up for public discussion, I said firmly, and neither are my spending choices. Thomas grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. Mom, stop it. You're embarrassing us. I pulled my arm away. No, Thomas, you've embarrassed yourselves. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. Livia, Ben, I wish you both every happiness. I'd be happy to contribute to a reasonable honeymoon, but I'll discuss that with you privately. As I turned to leave, Alex stood up as well. I'll walk you out, Grandma. In the lobby, away from prying eyes, I finally let my composure slip. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys. Are you okay to drive? Alex asked gently. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I'm fine, just a bit shaken. Should be proud of yourself. That took courage. I looked at my grandson, truly looked at him. In that moment, he reminded me so much of George. Would you like to come over for dinner tonight? I asked impulsively. Alex smiled. I'd like that. Later that evening, as we sat in my kitchen, sharing a simple meal of roast chicken, I confided in Alex about his parents' behavior over the past 3 years, the constant financial demands, the gradual erosion of respect. I'm not surprised, he said sadly. I've watched it happening. After Grandpa died, it was like they saw you as, I don't know, an ATM, I supplied. He nodded. And it's getting worse. Last week, I overheard them discussing your house again. Dad said something about how it's too big for one person and how they could help you downsize. I was stunned. My house was my sanctuary, filled with memories of the life George and I had built. Dad said it would be better for everyone if you downsized, Alex continued. He mentioned something about the real estate market being hot and how they could help you maximize your investment. I felt sick. They weren't just after my money. They wanted my home too. Alex, there's something I need to tell you, I said, deciding to trust him with the truth about George's codicil. But before I could continue, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Thomas's car in the driveway. It's your father, I said. Alex's expression hardened. You don't have to answer it, but I was done hiding. No, I think it's time we cleared the air. I opened the door to find Thomas standing there, his face flushed with anger. The hell was that performance at brunch? He demanded, pushing past me. Then he spotted Alex. What are you doing here? Having dinner with Grandma, Alex replied calmly. Something the rest of you might try sometime without asking for money. Thomas's face darkened. Stay out of this, Alex. This is between your mother and me. No, I said firmly. We're going to have this conversation. Alex stays. I'm tired of the private manipulations, Thomas. Let's put everything on the table. And in that moment, looking at my son's angry face and my grandson's protective stance, I knew we had reached the breaking point. There would be no going back. Had enough of your attitude, Mom, Thomas said, pacing my living room like a caged animal. First, the scene at the brunch, and now I find you've been poisoning Alex's mind against us. I sat calmly in George's old armchair, hands folded in my lap. Alex stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, watching his father with a mixture of disappointment and resolve. No one is poisoning anyone's mind, I replied evenly. We're simply acknowledging what's been happening in this family since your father died. And what exactly is that? Thomas demanded. You and Clara have been treating Grandma like a bank, not a person, Alex said before I could answer. The name tag at the wedding. Volunteering her to pay for Olivia's honeymoon without asking first. Talking about selling her house behind her back. You've been spying on us. Thomas's face flushed darker. I've been paying attention, Alex countered. Something you might try sometime. Thomas turned to me, his expression shifting to the conciliatory tone he always used when he wanted something. Mom, you're misunderstanding everything. We're just trying to help you manage your finances wisely. You're not getting any younger, and I'm 65, Thomas, not 95, I interrupted. My mind is perfectly sharp, and I'm more than capable of managing my own affairs. But Dad left you so much. Stop. I held up my hand. George left me exactly what he intended to leave me. His estate is not a family piggy bank. Thomas's false smile vanished. So, what are you saying? You're cutting us off because Clara made one stupid joke with a name tag. I'm saying that from now on, I'll be making my own decisions about my money in my home. If Olivia and Ben want a honeymoon in the Swiss Alps, they can save for it like most young couples do. If you and Clara want a bigger house, you can work for it. Thomas stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Then he turned. To Alex, I want to speak to my mother alone. I'm staying, Alex said firmly. This is family business. Exactly, Alex replied. And I'm family. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a calculation, a reassessment. He'd always been able to manipulate me when we were alone, playing on my emotions, my grief for George, my desire to keep the peace. But with Alex present, those tactics wouldn't work. It's fine, he snapped, heading for the door. But this isn't over, Mom. Not by a long shot. After he left, Alex let out a long breath. I'm sorry, Grandma. For what, sweetheart? You've done nothing wrong for not standing up sooner, for letting them treat you this way. I rose and hugged him tightly. You're standing up now. That's what matters. After Alex left, I sat in the quiet of my home thinking about George, about the codicil to his will, about the family we'd raised. Had we gone wrong somewhere with Thomas? Or had he always had this streak of entitlement that we'd failed? To see, more importantly, what was I going to do now? The answer came slowly, taking shape in my mind like a photograph developing. Instead of confronting Thomas and Clara directly with the codicil, which would only make them change their behavior out of fear rather than respect, I would simply let them continue showing their true colors. Meanwhile, I would quietly reclaim my life and my independence. The next morning, I called Arthur Jenkins. Eleanor, he answered warmly. I've been hoping to hear from you after the wedding. Yes, that's partly why I'm calling. I explained what had happened at the brunch and Thomas's visit afterward. I need to understand exactly what George left in his will, Arthur. Not just the codicil, but everything. There was a pause. Perhaps this would be better discussed in person. Could you come to my office this afternoon? 3 hours later, I sat across from Arthur in his well-appointed office as he explained the full extent of George's estate. The numbers took my breath away. George built several companies over his lifetime, Arthur explained, and sold them at just the right moments. His investments were extremely conservative, which means they weathered the economic downturns beautifully. I knew we were comfortable, I said faintly, but this. George was a private man when it came to money. He didn't believe in flaunting wealth. Arthur smiled. He always said you married him when he had nothing but potential in a beat-up Chevy, so he never wanted you to become one of those women who only care about designer labels and country club memberships. Oh. I laughed softly, hearing George's voice in those words. Hey, that sounds like him. As for the codicil, Arthur continued, it's straightforward but powerful. Any descendant who publicly humiliates you forfeits their entire inheritance. The name tag incident at the wedding would certainly qualify. And the brunch, that too, most likely. But Eleanor, you don't have to make any decisions right now. The codicil remains in effect for your lifetime. I nodded, thinking, what if? I wanted to make some changes of my own to my will, to how my assets are managed. Arthur leaned forward. What did you have in mind? By the time I left Arthur's office, I had a plan. No dramatic confrontations, no ultimatums, just a quiet reclaiming of my life and my power first. I called my old friend Beatrice, whom I hadn't seen much since George's death. We arranged to meet for lunch the following day. Then I stopped by the community center and picked up a brochure for their adult education classes. George had always encouraged me to pursue my interest in ceramics. Perhaps it was time. At home, I sat at my computer and began researching small business grants. Alex had mentioned wanting to open a vintage record shop after college, but was worried about the startup costs. A genuine investment in my grandson's future seemed like a perfect use of some of my resources. When my phone rang and I saw it was Clara, I let it go to voicemail. The old Eleanor would have answered immediately, anxious about what emergency or demand might be coming. But that Eleanor was fading away, replaced by a woman who was finally recognizing her own worth. The voicemail, when I listened to it later, was exactly what I expected. Eleanor, it's Clara. Thomas told me about your conversation last night. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We've always had your best interests at heart. Thomas and I were thinking we should have dinner this weekend to clear the air. Oh, and Olivia mentioned you'd reconsidered about the honeymoon. I really need to book soon to get the best rates. Call me back. I deleted the message without returning the call. Instead, I opened my checkbook and wrote a modest check as a wedding gift for Olivia and Ben. Enough for a nice honeymoon, but perhaps. To Niagara Falls, not the Swiss Alps. I enclosed it in a card with a warm note wishing them happiness, then sealed the envelope. My silent strategy had begun. No confrontations, no drama. Just quiet, firm boundaries. George would have approved. 6 months passed in a blur of quiet but significant changes. I enrolled in ceramics classes at the community center, reconnected with old friends, and spent more time with Alex, who visited regularly. I provided him with seed money for his record shop business plan, which was coming along beautifully. Meanwhile, Thomas and Clara's attitude towards me oscillated between chilly distance and desperate attempts to reestablish their access to my finances. When the silent treatment failed, they would suddenly appear with forced smiles and transparent excuses to visit. Each time they would eventually steer the conversation toward money or renovation they were planning. Livia's desire to buy a house with Ben, their own retirement concerns. Each time I'm managing my own finances became my mantra, delivered, with a smile that grew more confident with each repetition. They didn't take the rejection well. Clara's texts became increasingly hostile. Thomas's calls more demanding. But I had found a new strength in my silence. In the boundaries I was finally enforcing, today was my birthday. Why 71st? Despite my protests, Alex had insisted on organizing a small family gathering at my home. It's time they remember whose house this is, he'd said with a grim determination that reminded me so much of George. I spent the morning in my garden deadheading roses and drawing peace from the simple task. The garden had been another casualty of the past 3 years. I'd neglected it while catering to Thomas and Clara's demands. Now it was coming back to life. Much like I was, by mid-afternoon my home was ready for guests. Alex arrived early to help with final preparations. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, arranging cheese and crackers. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing my new dress, a bold red I would never have chosen before. Besides, it's just dinner. But we both knew it was more than that. This was the first time in months that the entire family would be together under my roof. Thomas and Clara, Olivia and Ben, and even a few of Georgia's old friends, including Arthur Jenkins. The doorbell rang precisely at 5 p.m. Thomas and Clara stood on the porch, their smiles so artificial I could almost hear the plastic stretching. "Happy birthday, Mom," Thomas said, handing me a bouquet of store-bought flowers. "Eleanor, you look different," Clara added, her eyes taking in my new dress, my styled hair. The subtle makeup I'd applied with techniques learned from a class at the community center. "Thank you," I said simply, stepping back to let them in. Olivia and Ben arrived moments later, followed by Arthur and another couple who had been close friends with George and me. I moved through the greetings and small talk with a composure I would have found impossible 6 months ago as we settled in the dining room. I couldn't help but notice Thomas's gaze moving around the house, assessing, calculating. Clara's eyes kept returning to the new ceramic vase on the mantel, a piece I'd created myself. "Did you redecorate, Eleanor?" she asked, her tone suggesting she found the changes disturbing. "Just a few updates," I replied. "I've been taking ceramics classes." "Ceramics classes?" Thomas echoed as if I'd said I was learning to fly spaceships. "Grandma's really talented," Alex said proudly. "She's already sold 2 pieces at the community art fair." "Sold?" Clara looked genuinely confused. "But why would you need to sell art?" I smiled. "It's not about need, Clara. It's about joy." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken by Ben asking about the record shop Alex was planning to open. "It's coming along great," Alex said. "Thanks to Grandma, I've got the business plan finalized and I'm looking at locations." Thomas's head snapped up. "Thanks to Grandma? What does that mean?" Alex met his father's gaze steadily. "It's Grandma's investing in my record shop." "Investing?" Thomas's voice rose. "With what money?" "My money," I said quietly. "But Eleanor," Thomas began, then caught himself, glancing at the other guests. "Maybe we should discuss this privately, Mom." "It's nothing to discuss," I replied. "I'm making my own financial decisions now." Thomas's face darkened. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Olivia interrupted with a story about her honeymoon to Niagara Falls, the destination they'd chosen after receiving my modest gift. The conversation shifted. Tension temporarily diffused after dinner. As we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Clara cornered me in the kitchen. "Eleanor, what's going on with you?" she demanded in a harsh whisper. "First, you refused to help with the honeymoon. Then we hear nothing from you for months, and now you're throwing money at Alex's pipe dream." "It's not a pipe dream," I replied calmly. "It's a solid business plan. Don't be naive. Record shops aren't profitable anymore. He's using you." "No, Clara, I'm supporting my grandson's ambition." "There's a difference." Her eyes narrowed. "Thomas and I have been talking. We think it's time you consider moving somewhere more manageable. Sunset Acres has lovely apartments, and the money from selling this house could help all of us." So there it was. The plan Alex had overheard, now brought into the open. "This house isn't for sale," I said firmly, "and my living arrangements aren't up for family discussion." Before she could respond, Thomas appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" "It's just wonderful," I said, picking up the cake I'd baked that morning. "Shall we have dessert?" In the living room, Thomas cleared his throat as I began cutting the cake. "Before we move on, Mom, there's something Clara and I want to discuss with everyone." My hands stilled on the cake knife. This wasn't part of the evening I had planned. "We've been concerned about Mom's decision-making lately," Thomas announced to the room. "She's making unwise financial choices, isolating herself, and refusing family guidance." A stunned silence fell over the room. "We think it's time to consider a power of attorney arrangement," he continued, "for her own protection." Arthur Jenkins set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "That's a serious step, Thomas. Do you have evidence of diminished capacity? She's giving away money to fund a record shop in the digital age." Thomas replied as if that explained everything. "And she's refusing to consider sensible downsizing options." I felt a strange calm settle over me. This moment had been inevitable from the day I'd started saying no. "Your mother seems perfectly competent to me," Arthur observed. Making decisions you disagree with is not evidence of incapacity. You don't understand, Thomas insisted, his voice rising. She's always relied on Dad and then on me for financial guidance. Now suddenly she's making these irrational choices. Enough. I set down the cake knife. I am not irrational, incapacitated, or in need of your guidance, Thomas. Be reasonable. I've been reasonable for 3 years, I interrupted. I've paid for renovations, vacations, cars, and a wedding. I've allowed you to treat me like a walking checkbook rather than your mother. But that stops now. Thomas's face flushed dark red. Is this what you want? He demanded, gesturing around the table. To humiliate us in front of everyone, to make us look like villains. No, Thomas, I said quietly. You've managed that all on your own, you selfish old woman. He hissed, standing up so abruptly his chair nearly toppled. After everything we've done for you, Thomas? Clara tugged at his arm, suddenly aware of how this looked to the others. But Thomas was beyond caring. You think you can just cut us off? Dad would be ashamed of you. It was at that precise moment that Arthur Jenkins cleared his throat and spoke the words that would change everything. Actually, Thomas, he said, your father anticipated this exact situation. The silence that followed Arthur's words was absolute. Thomas stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as Arthur reached into his jacket and removed a familiar envelope. George added a codicil to his will shortly before he passed. Arthur explained to the stunned room. He was concerned about how Eleanor might be treated after he was gone. What kind of codicil? Clara demanded, finding her voice first. Arthur looked to me silently, asking permission. I nodded. The codicil states that any descendant who publicly humiliates Eleanor forfeits their entire inheritance, Arthur said, his voice steady. This includes treating her with disrespect, attempting to control her finances against her wishes, or trying to force her from her home. That's ridiculous. Thomas sputtered. Dad would never... ... He did, Arthur interrupted. And as executive of his estate, I've been documenting the incidents over the past several months. He turned to me. Eleanor, I have to ask, do you want to enforce the codicil? All eyes turned to me. I looked at Thomas and Clara, their faces now pale with shock and dawning horror. I looked at Olivia, who seemed confused and embarrassed. Then I looked at Alex, whose expression held nothing but quiet support. Yes, I said finally. I do. Thomas collapsed back into his chair. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied. The name tag at the wedding, the honeymoon announcement at the brunch. The constant demands for money, and now this attempt to declare me incompetent. All of it stops today. But our inheritance? Clara whispered. It's forfeit, Arthur confirmed. All of it? Olivia asked, her voice small. Arthur nodded. I'm afraid so. The codicil is quite clear. This isn't fair. Thomas suddenly shouted, slamming his fist on the table. She tricked us to let us believe the money was just sitting there waiting to be used. No, Thomas, I said quietly. I never promised. You anything? You assumed you took, you demanded, but you never once asked what I needed or wanted. What about Olivia and Ben? Clara asked desperately. They haven't done anything wrong. Arthur consulted his notes. Olivia was present at several incidents, but didn't actively participate in the humiliation. However, she also never spoke up to defend Eleanor. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have said something at the wedding about the name tag. I reached across the table and took her hand. We all make mistakes, sweetheart. The question is what we learn from them. So what happens now? Ben asked, putting his arm around Olivia. Now, Arthur said, according to the terms of the codicil, Thomas and Clara's share of George's estate is redistributed. To whom? Thomas demanded. Half goes to Eleanor outright, Arthur explained. The other half is divided among descendants who have shown her proper respect and care. All eyes turned to Alex, who looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know, he said quickly. I swear, Grandma, I had no idea about any of this. I know, sweetheart, I assured him. Your grandfather would be proud of the man you've become. Thomas stood up again, his face contorted with anger. This is a setup, a conspiracy. I'll contest it in court. You're welcome to try, Arthur said calmly. But the codicil is legally binding, and we have ample evidence of the conditions being met. Eleanor, Clara began, her voice suddenly. Honey, surely we can work this out as a family. We never meant. Save it, Clara, I cut in. It's too late for that, so that's it, Thomas demanded. After everything we've done for you, you're just cutting us off. No, Thomas, I said, standing to face my son directly. After everything I've done for you, I'm finally standing up for myself. There's a difference. The gathering ended shortly after. Olivia and Ben left with awkward apologies and promises to call soon. Thomas and Clara stormed out without another word. Arthur and the other guests made tactful exits, leaving just Alex and me in the sudden quiet of my home. Are you okay? He asked, helping me clear the barely touched dessert plates. I'm better than okay, I replied, surprised to find it was true. I feel free. 1 year later, I stood in the doorway of Vinyl Revival. The record shop Alex had finally opened. In a charming converted brick building in downtown Evanston. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating shelves of carefully curated vinyl and comfortable listening booths. A coffee counter, staffed by Alex's girlfriend, Chloe, served locally roasted beans and homemade pastries. In the children's section, a whimsical mural I had painted covered one wall. A scene with musical notes and dancing animals for young listeners to discover. Twice a week, I led story time for neighborhood children, something I'd never imagined myself doing before. The small apartment upstairs had been renovated as well. Not for me, I still loved my home with its memories of George. But for a young musician in residence program. Alex had established with part of his inheritance. The bell over the door jingled, and Olivia stepped in, pushing a stroller with her 3-month-old daughter, Georgia, named after her grandfather. Grandma, Olivia called, spotting me. Didn't know you'd be here today. It's dropping off some new bookmarks I painted, I said, bending to admire baby Georgia. Hello, little one. Over the past year, Olivia and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship. After the initial shock of the inheritance revelation, she had made genuine efforts to connect with me independently of her parents. Ben had proven to be a steadying influence, encouraging her to form her own opinions rather than echoing her mother's. Thomas and Clara were a different story. After several failed attempts to contest the codicil, they had moved to Florida, where Thomas had taken a job with a former business associate. Our communication was limited to 2 Christmas cards and occasional updates through Olivia. Have you heard from your parents lately? I asked as Olivia settled at a small table with the baby. Mom called last week, she said with a sigh. Same conversation as always. Complaints about Dad's job, the house they had to settle for, how unfair everything is. I'm sorry. Don't be, Olivia said firmly. They made their choices. I made mine. Chloe brought over coffee and fresh scones, cooing over the baby before returning to the counter. Alex emerged from the back room with a stack of new arrivals, his face lighting up when he saw us. Perfect timing, he said, joining us at the table. I wanted to run something by you both. He explained his idea for expanding the shop's community programs, including music lessons for adults and songwriting workshops for teens. It would mean reinvesting some of the profits, he added. But I think it's worth it. I think it's wonderful, I said, feeling a surge of pride. As they discussed the details, I gazed around the sunlit record shop. Its beautiful space that represented not just Alex's dream, but a new chapter for all of us. In the year since the revelation, I had discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for too long. I'd made new friends, developed my painting, even started traveling. Simple weekend trips at first, then 2 weeks in Italy with a senior tour group where I'd met Claude. A widower from Boston with kind eyes and a dry wit who called me every Sunday. George would have approved, I thought, Not just of the record shop or my newfound independence, but of the boundaries I'd finally established. He had tried to protect me with his codicil, but in the end, I had learned to protect myself. Olivia's baby let out a happy gurgle, drawing me back to the present. This was my family now. Not perfect, not complete, but real. We were building something new from the ruins of what had been lost, and it was, in its own way, beautiful. "What do you think, Grandma?" Alex asked, pulling me into the conversation. I smiled at my grandson and granddaughter, at the baby who represented our future, at the record shop that had grown from trust and respect rather than obligation and greed. "I think," I said, "that this is exactly where we're supposed to be. If you've ever sat in a room full of family and felt completely alone, dismissed, disrespected, or used die hope, this story reminds you, you are not the problem. You are not invisible. You are not obligated to finance people who won't even offer you kindness. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is draw a line quietly and with dignity, and let the chips fall where they must." If any of this resonates with you, please share your experience in the comments. Hit like and subscribe for more stories that speak to the complicated, messy, and often beautiful truth of what family really means. Because sometimes healing begins not with an apology, but with a boundary.